From the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Morrow, and I'm here with my co-host, Father Josh Nevitt.
Hey Jen, good to be here on the podcast today.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
And Mike Walsh is here too.
Oh. Well, I tell you, Father Josh might as well be one of our co-hosts because he's been on the podcast, 3 out of the last 4 episodes we've done?
So.
Recording twice in 24 hours,
Yes.
I think.
After our, if you all missed it, we did a, what'd you say?
Breaking
news podcast yesterday on the big news that we got a new Pope Leo the 14th.
Pope Leo XIII, yes.
Okay. It's going to take a little while to get used to that. I'm trying very hard because we're so used to, in the day, Pope Benedict the 16th. I have to make sure I'm using the right numerals every time I do this.
I talked about this last night with my husband, and I said there is no way that those numbers are going to not end up wrong in the paper one day.
Oh, yeah, because it's XIV or XVI.
So as we decided that what we were going to do is I was going to just paint them on my wall. So
That's
I can
great.
look up from the computer and just see them there and then know.
Did you see, someone sent this to me, Villanova posted Pope Leo the XI, and it was the Villanova V. Mike, I know you don't like
Can't stand Villanova. They're already being insufferable, to tell you the truth. It really did. It took probably took less than 3 hours before I started seeing all the Villanova stuff.
Aww.
So irritating. The hawk will never die. Anyway, we have a better phrase, at least. Mascot phrase, that is.
Yeah.
Anyway. However,
so Father Josh
the
is here.
Villanova stuff aside, still very exciting. Now that you've had 24 hours to sort of take it all in, how do you feel about the new pontiff?
I'm going to just jump in there real quick. Did you know also that he is Pope? Oh, wait, now I'm going to go back. Pope Leo XIII. Did you know that he created the St. Michael prayer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
And then yesterday, the day that Pope Leo XIV was elected, was the anniversary. There's in Italy, down by where Padre Pio is a cave called Gargano, and St. Michael appeared there, I think in the 400s. But yesterday is the anniversary, and they celebrate it as their feast day.
Oh, wow.
There at that shrine, that ancient shrine.
Wow.
So there's a little connection. And shout out to Father Hughes, who was insistent that the new pope would take the name Michael. And he's wrong, but he still was right, in certain ways.
It was also...
I was really hoping for Michael, by the way. Ever since Father Hughes said that, I was like, come on, make it happen. All right.
It was also the birthday of Fulton Sheen.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I was talking about that earlier today with my other co-host, my better co-host, Emily Italia. And better together.
Oh, I thought I was the better co-host.
You're the better co-host. You want to talk about it? Because we're, Fulton Sheen. And we were talking about also that this is the first time the Pope election has been covered in this way. There was multimedia and everything with Pope Francis, but not to the level of it is now where it's covered,
The best, I rewatched the Cardinals, because they come out on the balconies too.
Yeah.
And they were pointing at the drones that were flying around.
Yeah.
They were fascinated by that.
It was.
Well, what was really interesting is actually we have to give a lot of credit to the Vatican. They did. Okay. So the beauty of social media nowadays is, the news always breaks before the thing happens in some fashion or another, even if it's hints, even if it's suggestions of what might happen. Nothing.
Yeah.
That guy walks out, and it's the first time anybody knows who it is. It's great. I love the security of the Catholic Church.
That's what happens when you put cell phone jammers in the Sistine Chapel. That
is.
even if someone wanted
that.
to,
Yeah.
I heard a story that when Francis was elected, he said the first thing I want to do is call Pope Benedict, and he was going to do it while he was changing in the Room of Tears. And he came out, and everyone was looking at him saying, thinking, did you call Pope Benedict? He said, I tried to call him, but the signal won't go through because of the jammers.
Yeah.
So if you remember to 12 years ago, it took a while for Francis to come out on the balcony. And part of it was he
Couldn't get a signal out.
He had to get a signal and call the Pope.
I didn't know that
Emeritus,
because it took a long time from him to come out on the balcony. I remember that it was a long time, longer than an hour,
which is what we had yesterday.
Yeah.
No, it was great. Actually, I'm curious. You spent a lot of time in Rome, having been educated at the North American Pontifical. I always get it
the
wrong.
Pontifical North American College is where I lived, and my degree is from the Angelicum, where the Pope has a doctorate.
Oh, look at that. Look at more ties
And where
together.
John Paul had a doctorate as well. So,
look at you.
yeah.
Fancy.
You know what? He is the better co-host.
Well, he's certainly the more educated. No doubt about that. But what I was going to ask you is, since you spent your time in Rome, and I went on a pilgrimage to Rome, so my mom was watching the Pope coming out and stuff like that, and she looked at the area in front of the Vatican. She was looking underneath that sort of portico there, and she's like, "Hey, Mike, just out of curiosity, did you walk along there during your pilgrimage?" I was like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. As a matter of fact, there's a little like portico underneath, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is where the Pope comes out."
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting to watch it go, wow, what an extraordinary experience. Once again, by the way, all thanks to the world to Father Robert Hughes for convincing me to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in Rome, that I had that opportunity. But for all the time, like, do you still like it when there's a momentous papal exercise like that, the pomp and circumstance? Do you think back to your time in Rome and that, oh yeah, I was there?
I do. I do. I watching the announcement yesterday, and watching the shots of the crowd in the square. I was like, oh, I know that guy. Oh, I know that sister. Oh, I know.
Wow,
and
really?
Some of it was just like, some of them were my classmates. One who's now he's one of the American Cardinal secretaries, and so he was in the square. Another was a classmate of mine who's now back in Rome getting a doctorate, and he was in the square. And then one was that I was not expecting to see, a Polish sister who one of the apostolates I had was running Duquesne's campus ministry. Duquesne University's Rome campus is at the mother house of these sisters. And so they had this like young Polish sister that was living there, and they were saying, go hang out with the Duquesne students, to give her something to do.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, that's she was Sister Maria Goretti. And I think she went back to her Polish name because she said she was having trouble with the passports. That there was a question of, is her name, I think it was Agnes, or is her name Maria Goretti?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I'm a sucker for the pomp and circumstance, which was actually the first time I was annoyed I had this job.
Because you couldn't watch it?
I couldn't really watch it.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my mom about that last night. I couldn't really watch it and let it sort of wash over me because I was fielding media calls and we were trying to get the statements ready and all that kind of stuff. I missed out on being able to watch it with Bishop Sullivan, like you guys did in the lunchroom all together, and he was giving you guys like play-by-play and explaining like who the guy was and his connections. Our colleague Mike Bress was there inexplicably. So because you posted a photograph of him.
I grabbed everybody on my way up, and I was like, "Come on, we're all going upstairs to watch it with the bishop." And whoever happened to be around went up, and it was Mike Bress was there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Bishop Williams couldn't be with us because he was down in Sea Isle at a number
for confirmation and some meetings,
meetings and stuff like that. So I was sort of texting with him back and forth to make sure we got all of our stuff done. But I have to give a lot of thanks to Father Adam Chehesky and Marianne Zayas at the cathedral, who stepped up and did interviews with Telemundo yesterday, and that was great. And I saw their clips today. They were fantastic, and it was really nice. And Father Adam always says, my Spanish isn't very good. Well, as an English speaker who barely understands Spanish, I thought I did a great job.
Sounded good.
Yeah, so that was very nice. Cool. So, very exciting day.
Actually, speaking about languages, did anybody see the Pope's first Mass this morning, where he spoke English for a little bit
in English?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
cool.
That was really cool.
I did not get to see that.
Yeah,
really neat.
That was neat to see.
Who was present for the Mass? I'm curious.
The one today,
Yeah.
the Cardinals.
Okay.
Yeah, so the tradition is the day after the election, they gather in the Sistine Chapel again, where they had just voted, and all the Cardinals are invited, not just those under the age of 80. But any cardinal can come, and they can't celebrate at that Mass. And
cool.
I think just today they released his schedule for the next 2 weeks, and when he's going to have public appearances, when he's going to have the inauguration Mass, which is a week from this Sunday. It'll be is it the 17th or the 18th? I think the 18th Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be then, and there's a few other ceremonies he has to do with the major papal basilicas in Rome as well.
Oh, that'd be really nice. And actually, we have to give you a lot of credit as well, because it was Father Nevitt who sent us our first behind-the-scenes footage. The Vatican News put out a nice little package of what it was like as soon as he was named and greeting this former fellow cardinals and things like that.
Yeah.
That was really neat. Yeah, Vatican News did a really good job with all their stuff. Shout out to them too. Their angles for the coverage was great, and they really did a fantastic job. So, and how they got all those seagulls to show up around the chimney, that was
even
fantastic.
the baby seagull.
Baby seagull, he was like feeding him right when the smoke came out. It was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was adorable.
And then the parent seagulls could fly away. The baby seagull couldn't fly. He was hopping away. Oh my gosh, trying to run away from the smoke.
Yeah, we were in a meeting when that happened,
Yeah.
and I had my laptop up the whole time just in case something happened, and I'm looking at the meeting. I go, oh, we got smoke, and then I'm like, this is with all the communication staff, and I go, oh, we got smoke, and then I'm like, well, we got white smoke. All right, everybody go, do your thing. Which, by the way, I need to also give credit to, and I don't say this enough, but I truly believe it. Our communication staff is fantastic. The Catholic Star Herald staff, the communications folks, I didn't have to give anybody direction. I just literally said, white smoke, go do your job. And everybody went off and did their job, and it was beautiful. So you guys did a great work yesterday. So turning around a lot of stuff in a very short period of time. Nice job, everybody.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Please pass along my compliments to everybody.
I will.
Yes.
And then I went home and promptly watched everything again because, like you said, when you're in it, you miss it. So that's how I felt about Pope Francis' funeral. I feel like I missed all of that because
Me too.
we were working it.
Yeah.
At least last night, I could go home and I went back to the live stream and from Vatican Media actually, and went back to the white smoke, watched it all again from the white smoke. I wanted to see the whole thing. I wanted to see everybody go into the square. I wanted to see all of it.
I hope the Vatican Media, because they have like little 3-minute clips of different moments of that. But there's somewhere in their archives on YouTube, you can find like an hour and a half, 2-hour long video of Francis from the time the white smoke came up to the time he left the balcony. And I hope they have that, because that's just a great video to have everything at once.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're great archives.
And like you said, some of those angles. There was one angle, when Pope was standing up there reading, and the angle, you could see the book. You could see actually what he was reading because of the angle of those cameras right there, or the drones.
And that's the one where you could see the tears in his eyes.
Yeah, and I was like, holy moly, that was amazing.
And that's actually how we knew he was about to come out, because the cameraman came out first. It was 2 camera guys came out on the ledge first, dressed in black as we always are.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's coming soon. And then the Cardinals came out on the 2 side ledges, and then the Pope came out. Well, actually, then the Cardinal came out, and then the Pope came out. But that was fantastic.
Yeah, it was pretty neat.
Yeah. And I hope, to our listeners, I hope you're listening to this and feeling pity for your Catholic communicators and how hard we work and what we deprive ourselves of. So all for you. We do this for you people.
We do.
Even we forced. Father Josh was supposed to record this episode yesterday, and then so he records the emergency episode instead. But we made him wait about 2 hours.
Breaking news.
Okay, whatever. The breaking news episode. But we made him wait 2 hours. But we put him to work while we were here. We were asking him questions, and he edited a few things for me too. So
that's true.
It was very useful.
Mike, I hope with the ordinations coming up that you and John Galitz have some great angles. I want to see the tears in these seminarians being ordained eyes.
Actually, that is highly likely, as a matter of fact, because our equipment's better than back in the day. We have better cameras than back in the day, and where the priest ordination is happening is actually one of the best places to record, because it's got a lot of frontage between the sanctuary and the pews, so we can actually get some really good camera angles.
Can we get a drone shot for outside as the priests process in? And
do you know that John and I have actually looked into doing that, but both of us would have to get pilot's license to be able to pull that off. And it turns out John and I occasionally get a little lazy.
You get busy with other things.
Neither one of us was
elections and everything else.
It's more that neither one of us feel like taking a test. It's like, all right, our testing days are behind us. But he and I both own drones. Actually, he might have just sold his, but we have owned drones in the past and have used them, and we have thought about it. So it may come out at some point, but we'll see what happens. However, that brings us to the actual reason you're here. Though I do appreciate the fact you gave us an extra 14 minutes of Pope talk, because I'm sure that there's lots of other stuff, and that he's going to be the topic of conversation for quite some time. No, we're actually here to talk about vocations, because we do have some excitement coming up. And in addition to being a correspondent for both Fox News 29 as well as the Catholic Star Herald,
Fox News dumped me for the Villanova priest.
So irritating. But anyway,
we will always be loyal. I just want you to know.
That's right. We do not cast people aside.
There's actually a priest as an Augustinian from St. Augustine Prep waiting outside right now, right?
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Much like the fact that I am a St. Joe's grad, I'm also a Gloucester Catholic grad, and I can guarantee you there will never be anybody from the Augustinians here, or the Prep rather. The order itself can certainly come, nobody from the Prep.
Even them. Some of them are good guys.
We'll see.
Who know the new Pope?
Yes.
All right. Now I got. Okay. Now I have a
Yeah,
different
take that
perspective
back.
on this.
Again. We alienate no one here. But yeah, we're
Except
here to talk
Villanova.
about. Yeah, except. All right, Mike. You've said it like 8 times. We're here to talk about vocations.
Yeah.
So we have 2 big events coming up.
You know where none of our seminarians have gone? Villanova. Just point that out right now.
But we have had priests who went there.
Yeah, but they're not my favorite priest. No, I'm just kidding. All right, now we're actually talking about
2 big
vocations.
events coming up, Jen.
Yes, we have a diaconate.
Yes, so by the time this comes out, who is currently Nicholas Nacion will be Deacon Nicholas Nacion. Nick is a seminarian in his 3rd year of theology. He is a parishioner at Holy Trinity Parish in Margate. He's from Ventnor, Holy Spirit High School alum, and for the last 7 years has been preparing himself for this moment, but discerning a vocation to the priesthood. So he'll be ordained a transitional deacon tomorrow on Saturday, May
9th,
10th.
10th.
Right.
10th. The 11th is Mother's Day. That's
Thank
how
you.
I'm remembering this.
Good job.
And then next Saturday, which will be the 17th, who are currently deacons, Tom and Tim, Deacon Tom Piro, Deacon Tim Mulranen will be ordained to the priesthood. That, if the listeners want to attend, is at 10:30 a.m. at Mary Mother of Mercy Parish, Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Glassboro.
I get the shortest commute. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I got a long one tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, this is always exciting times for us, and those 3 guys are 3 of my favorites. Talk about a couple of guys who always step up and help out. Nick Nacion has done great work for the parish in Atlantic City. He's brought a lot of interesting stuff. He essentially, sort of handheld the last 2 Wedding of the Seas that we've done in Atlantic City. He did great work with that. And then, Deacons Timmy and Tommy, soon to be fathers Timmy and Tommy. You want to talk about two of the.
I think it's going to be Fathers Mulranen and Father Piro.
Yeah.
Listen, once they're seminarians, it takes a little while to break out of that habit. So I'll get to that at some point, I promise. But they are 2 of the friendliest guys. Always step up, big smiles, completely different personalities, and yet. I don't know how they'll feel about this, but they seem to have like a brotherly bond that I don't it's not that actually the seminarians always seem to have a brotherly bond, but those 2 in particular, maybe because they've been paired together for so long.
They kind of seem like when you have certain saints like Saints Philip and James that they just always go together.
Yeah.
James and John always go together. They seem like Tim and Tom, Tom and Tim. They just
That could be it.
Yeah, they entered the same year. No, they entered a year apart, I think. If I remember, but they lined up as classmates. Yeah. And so for 7 years or so now, they've been together. Yeah.
And the irony is that Tom and Nick often get confused for each other.
I have literally...
I'm sorry, Tim and Nick. Sorry, Tim and Nick.
I have done that myself.
Yeah, many times the Mulranen and the Nacion have been confused for each other.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the truth.
Do you know, I've learned... people confuse me for other priests. Even if I get up and I introduce myself as I visit parishes for Mass, and... they'll come up to me after and they say, aren't you... Yeah, an example, I got up at the beginning of a Mass about a year ago. I'm Father Josh Nevitt. I'm Associate Vocations Director. I'm Bishop Sullivan's Secretary. I'm saying Mass this weekend. Pleasure to be here. At the end, someone said to me, well, you're the priest at our alma mater. And I said, where's your alma mater? Camden Catholic. I said, oh, no, that's Father Steve Robbins. And I don't think we look alike. But I've learned, I also get confused for Father Peter Gallagher at times. I think Father Steve and Father Gallagher get confused for each other at times. So I've learned that some people think all young priests are the same.
That is possible.
That is possible.
I think that is what it is.
But you should take a lot of pleasure out of that because, we're now loosely referring to you as a young priest.
I know.
You've
I'm
been
not
around
a young priest anymore. but I think they just think, especially some older parishioners, that there's no young priests, and so there just must be one in the whole diocese who goes all over the place. And they don't actually know his name, but they just know that,
It's you!
Well, that's one of the graces that occurred during the Sullivan years, and we have no reason to believe it won't continue forth with Bishop Williams, is that we really have done a great job with having a lot of seminarians, because we actually do have quite a few young priests in the diocese. Yeah, praise God, because and they're kind of all over the place. Like occasionally I'll walk into a church and I don't remember where most of the pastoral associates are, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I was at your ordination like 3 years ago. I forgot about it. You're down here. It's just great to see. It's and it does suggest a very lively and living church in Camden.
Yeah, it was great that in the 12 years Bishop Sullivan was our bishop, he ordained 15 men to the priesthood, and 17 men total for the priesthood, I think is what the ad from the Office of Vocations said in the Bishop Sullivan edition, counting ordaining Tom and Tim to the transitional diaconate.
Yeah.
So that's really been outstanding, and
we've even supported a couple order priests that were ordained down here as well. So South Jersey has done an excellent job of producing men to the priesthood, which it continues today. You have, even when these ordations happen, you're going to have a nice bench, as they say, of seminarians. Where are seminarians located currently? Like, not today, but where are they going to school?
Where they go to school. Right now we have seminarians at St. Joseph Seminary in Yonkers, New York. It's also called Dunwoody. It's in the Dunwoody section of Yonkers. It's really a beautiful building, a historic seminary. Bishop Sullivan is probably the most famous alum of St. Joseph Seminary. At least in South Jersey, he is.
Okay.
And that is a theologate. So that's the seminarians who are closer to priestly ordination. They're studying theology. It also houses, though, our, I'm going to use a big word, the propaedeutic seminarians. And that's a new year that Pope Francis implemented into the formation of diocesan priests. He implemented it about 10 years ago now that it was in the documents, but it just came into force in the U.S. that we had to follow this year about a year ago. This is our first set of guys going through it. Maybe the second year that it's been happening mandatory in the U.S. So that's a year. I think propaedeutic means like before study. So before they go to study full time, it's almost a year off to pray and discern, and they focus more on their what they call the human formation and the spiritual formation. Instead of the intellectual formation, which is the study, but just to pray and discern and see, where is God in my life? How have I gotten to this point that I've heard God's voice? How is God still speaking to me as I go forward? And it makes that time for that. So those are our guys at St. Joseph Seminary. And then we also have guys who are in college seminary. They're undergraduate students. They're getting an undergrad degree in philosophy and theology. And they are at Seton Hall. They're at the college seminary, St. Andrew's Hall, which is where I went. It's a great program where they're living on their own, not each on their own, but they're living with other seminarians. But their classes are on Seton Hall's campus, and they take a regular set of undergraduate classes. They have math class and science class, but also their philosophy classes, also their theology classes. And so I think it gives them a nice balance of being in the seminary and having the structure of prayer and formation, but also having the freedom of college, where, as Bishop Sullivan likes to say, I like that they go there because there's pretty girls in their classes. And
it is part of the discernment process,
Yeah.
Jen. They have to discern.
Of course.
It's
Yep.
an important one, actually.
It is.
in fact, the first wedding I did was the son of Deacon Dean Johnson, who wrote in the Vocations
Yeah.
edition of the Star Herald. But Zach entered the seminary. He was a year behind me at St. Andrews. And during that year, he met Amanda. And you could tell there was something going on. And, at the end of the year, Zach came to me, and we were friends, right? And he said, I got to tell you, I'm not going to continue on to next year. And I said, are you going to ask Amanda out? Because you could tell, right?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. And he waited until his last final. And that night they went on their first date, and they're married now. And they said it was between me doing the wedding or Deacon Dean, Zach's dad, doing the wedding. Whoever got ordained first. And I got ordained first. I got the honor.
Aw,
and it was at Seton Hall Chapel. It was
Oh,
at Seton
wow.
Hall
That's
Chapel.
It's such a beautiful,
that's
Yeah,
lovely
yeah.
there.
beautiful chapel.
Yeah.
Well, I remember just last month when I was talking to Bishop Sullivan for his retirement issue, and anyway, so
I feel like she was about to tell a story and then decided, you know what, I'm going to tell that story right
no,
now.
I'm going to tell it.
I
So
don't know, what was that all about?
because we were talking about vocations and about how many young men that had been ordained under him, and he was saying the same thing. He was like, I've been at their ordinations, and he's like, and I've celebrated the wedding for men who were in
Have left,
vocations,
yeah.
and instead their vocation was marriage.
Yep.
And was very open about that. So I think that completely goes into what you're saying.
Yeah.
Being
Oh, yeah, we've
on
had a couple
college
in my time
campus.
here. I mean, I won't call them out or anything like that, but they were actually some of my favorite seminaries, as a matter of fact. Turned out to be good Catholic gentlemen as opposed to
there you
good
go.
Catholic priests, but every single one of them's a great guy.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I think stories like that need to be told because as vocations director, I go across the diocese. I work with the guys who are discerning. Once they enter the seminary, Father Adam Chahesky, who's the director of vocations, works with them. I work mainly with the guys discerning the priesthood before they enter the seminary. And one of the biggest obstacles is these guys are saying, I'm not sure yet. And so they don't want to enter the seminary because they're still thinking, what if she's out there, or what if this isn't right for me? It's like, great, okay, you can still enter the seminary. She might still be out there. You might meet her at Seton Hall, you know?
Yeah.
And that's part of the discernment process. Discerning, it means prayerfully considering, asking what God's will is, and we discern practically. We discern through our actions. You can sit on the fence the whole time, but eventually you have to make a decision. And it's a shame because I've seen guys too who I think get caught up in discernment paralysis and put things off longer than they should have. Even some of our priests today will talk about how they experienced that, and then finally they entered.
Father Michael Romano famously on one of his episodes talked about that and how he fought it and fought it and fought it and fought it, and finally, and he had people come up to him and say, you'd be a great priest, and he'd fight it until the day he realized, oh, maybe this is the way to go. And then he still had his discernment process, and someone who leaves the discernment process, the vocation process, that is not a failure in any way, shape, or form, and they shouldn't consider it a personal failure. It's not a failure of the directors. It's not a failure of the bishop. It's not a failure of the seminaries. It is the process, part of the process. So you should, if you've ever considered it, go for it.
Yeah.
You may meet your future wife,
or you may become a priest.
Or you might become a
that too.
priest.
But you know
I mean,
what?
or that.
I like, Mike. I love describing the seminary process as dating to marriage, right? And because that's an image that people get. So when two people date, first you spot each other, like across the classroom or something. You might like that person, but I'm going to speak from the guy's perspective. She's got to like you too, Then you might ask them out, or you might start talking to them, and there might be a mutual interest. You ask that person out, you go on dates, then you realize this is something I want to go steady with, right? So then you're boyfriend and girlfriend, and some time goes by, you still get to know each other, and then you start asking, could this be the one for the rest of my life? And so there's this, you might not even get engaged yet, but you're kind of going in that direction. Then you get engaged, and then you get married. And I think it's very similar with discerning the priesthood. Both marriage and priesthood are vocations, right? A guy might be interested in the priesthood. He might see something attractive there. He might feel something in his heart. But the church also has to be interested in you. And there are some guys that, for whatever reasons, can't enter the seminary. And the church might either deny them or dissuade them from applying. And so that's very much like early on, like just because you feel like you want to marry this person does not mean she wants to marry you. Yeah. Just because someone feels like they might be called to the priesthood is not necessarily a call from God. It comes both from the man's own discernment and the church's discernment of them. We have an amazing, I'm so impressed, coming into this role about 3 years ago, was so impressed with our Vocations Advisory Board, which is a team of priests, of deacons, laymen and women, psychologists, and the process that we go through even before a guy enters the seminary. And it's very, Pope Francis spoke of synodality. He spoke of listening to one another and their ideas and their thoughts, and the Holy Spirit speaking through them. And as we gather with these women and men and priests and deacons and others, and we discuss these guys who are coming forward, not in a judgmental way, but in an honest and open way. And we're saying, how can we help this guy grow in his relationship with the Lord, follow the call that he feels like God is putting in his heart? That's where the church discerns as well. Mm-hmm. So a guy might be interested in the priesthood. He starts talking to me as the vocations director, right? We're talking about the possibility. I'm discerning him just as much as he's discerning the priesthood. I have behind me our Vocations Advisory Board who's discerning him as well. And what that looks like is this a guy and that God might be calling to be a priest. Then he enters the seminary, and I don't describe that as like being engaged. I think entering the seminary, especially the first few years, is a lot like dating. Mm-hmm. You're exclusive with this person, but you're not sure if you're going to marry them yet. Yeah. There's something that's attracting you to them. There's something that's attracting the church to you. There's something public about it, right? Where our seminarians do wear the cassock and surplice. At times they wear the Roman collar, but they're not priests yet. And then as they get closer, they should, if they're discerning right, if they're praying right with God, become more and more certain that this is what God wants for me, and that this is what I want to do with my life. And I think those two things go together. St. Ignatius of Loyola, a Jesuit, Mike, as educated in a Jesuit school. Well, we're done talking about the Augustinians of
also
Pope Leo.
School named for Chicago. In
There
Chicago,
you go. But St. Ignatius of Loyola said that, I'm paraphrasing, but he says that the deepest desires of our heart and God's deepest desires for us are one and the same. That if we're seeking to follow God, and if we're receiving the sacraments, we're living in a state of grace, that the deepest desires of our heart, because God lives within us, the Spirit dwells within us. So that's the stirrings of the Spirit in our own hearts is a sign of a vocation, right? Yeah. So it's, as a guy gets closer to ordination, he's saying, yes, this is what I want to do, and it's what I believe God wants me to do. And those two things go together, right? Until he's, they speak in the seminary about a presumption of permanence. So that's where you're a little less discerning and questioning, is this what I want? As much as you're realizing that this is the direction my walk with God is going. And that's when the seminary actually, like, you begin even taking more classes where you're preparing for the priesthood. A guy doesn't take homiletics, giving homily practice, right? Yeah. In his first year in the seminary. He's going to do that in like his fifth or sixth year in the seminary. It's going to be a while. People always say, why does the seminary take so long? Well, this is it, right? It's this process of discerning and figuring it out and moving towards the priesthood. And then he's called to orders by the bishop. So the bishop who really represents the church in his own diocese calls him and confirms that call that he's been feeling in his heart. Nick Nachione, who's going to be ordained tomorrow, he was called by Bishop Williams on Bishop Williams' first day as bishop. Deacons Tom and Tim, they were called to orders actually by Bishop Sullivan. Bishop Sullivan's last official act as the bishop, he called them to orders at his retirement mass of Thanksgiving for his ministry here in Camden. So that's a little bit more like the engagement at that point, where it confirms. It's saying this is it. And then the marriage, yes, priesthood ordination is a big deal, but in a certain way, that lifelong commitment happens at ordination to the diaconate. So tomorrow, when Nick Nachione's ordained a deacon, he will take the promise of celibacy. He'll make a promise to pray the liturgy of the hours, and he'll make a promise of respect and obedience to the bishop. And there's other promises that are part of the ritual text, but those are the main three. What's interesting is at priesthood ordination, he renews the promise of respect and obedience, but he doesn't promise celibacy again. He doesn't promise to pray the breviary again, because it's a different, it's the same sacrament, but in a different order. And so like the diaconate ordination actually is a little bit more like the wedding day. At that point, he's a member of the clergy of the Diocese of Camden. Like our deacons are clergy. That's why they wear the collars. Right. And Nick will become a member of the clergy of the diocese, what they call incardinated into the diocese. He'll have that lifelong promise of celibacy that he'll make at his diaconate ordination, and the promise of respect and obedience to the bishop. So that's why I describe it like marriage, right? Because it's a similar process. You follow similar steps, and at any point up until ordination, just like at any point up until someone's wedding day, you can walk away and you can say, this isn't for me, and there should be a freedom there. There should be a respect there. If someone is discerning appropriately in the seminary, they're making these choices in freedom without coercion, without fear, without feeling like this is what I have to do because my family will reject me if I don't become a priest. But a freedom of this is what God is calling me to.
I love that description. Yeah. I've never heard it described like that.
Like dating?
Yeah.
Yeah, neither have I.
It makes perfect sense.
Now I see how you got the job. Good job. Proud of you.
Thanks.
Well, it's funny.
Mike's been wondering for years, and now we know.
Why father never the vocation?
Well, I mean, in the very beginning, yeah, definitely. But I've had the fortune of actually seeing Father Josh out in the high schools when we would do visits and stuff like that, and Bishop Sullivan was always great to put him to task in a room full of young people and really explain like what he did and what the purpose is. And the truth of the matter is, I've seen it over several years now, and he has actually become quite adept at engaging with these young people and sort of encouraging them. And I suspect he himself has a discerning eye where I'm willing to bet that you can kind of read where there might be a young man out there in your presence and you go, oh, I might want to focus on this guy a little bit because he seems to have that innate interest that you're looking for in a possible priest.
Yeah. I mean, God works in all different ways, right? So Pope Leo's brothers, who are both his big brothers but live in America, were giving interviews yesterday. And if my brother and sister are listening to this, if I ever have something big, do not give interviews. But Pope Leo's brothers did give interviews, and they said he wanted to know from the time he was like a little kid, and he played mass and stuff like that. I did not know when I was a little kid. It was when I was in high school that I heard a vocations talk, a priest and a seminarian sharing their stories, and I said, wow, maybe that's something that I could do. Maybe that's God's call for me. And that thought just never left at that point. So God does call in all different ways. God calls some when they're little, some in high school, in college, even later. But you know what? I think God does give, he calls in who we are. Before eternity, he knew us. He knew how he was going to make us. He knew our own likes and dislikes and interests, and he made us as we are, right? And I think then I've never found it helpful to think of a call to the priesthood or a call to the religious life as something external to someone where it's like, I'm living my life and then I got the call. I don't find that helpful for my own spirituality. Others do, and that's fine. There's various images of this, right? But I really find it helpful to say God, who indwells in us, who lives within us, that it comes from inside, right? That God made this man to be a priest, and so it's both God's call from outside, but also something inside, and sometimes that can be recognized, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people outside can recognize, and then you say, wow, I've got a bunch of altar servers, but this one altar server just really pays attention more at Mass, or he composes himself in a different way. That's kind of can be a sign where he's curious about certain things, and he's asking me more questions about the priesthood than most high schoolers, most college guys would ask about the priesthood. Like, I wonder if there's something going on here. So those are kind of external signs. That doesn't mean that guy's called to be a priest, right? There could be other reasons he's interested in it. There could be other reasons he pays attention at Mass, but it is something to focus on. It also doesn't mean that if a guy does not do that he'll never be called to be a priest. God calls different people at different times and in different ways. But I do think that there's a sense that, like, if you hate kids, you shouldn't be a teacher. Yeah. And if if just
right.
Yeah.
Not to say if Mass is boring to you, because that could be other things, but that someone knows. I think someone knows deep inside. And I've met guys who say, everyone says I'd be a good priest, but I just know it's not for me. And as vocations director, I have to respect that. Mm-hmm. That the church speaks about each person's freedom in discerning and choosing their vocation. To say, okay, if it's not for you, then let's rejoice in that.
This is a great reminder to talk about things with people, and don't just leave things bottled up. I don't know if I told you, Jen, there was a brief period where I actually, discerning might be strong, but considered going down the path of diaconate as a married man. Mm-hmm. And I actually met with two priests. Well, I met with one priest, brought it up to another priest, and talked to somebody else about it. And every single one of them talked me out of it. They're like, yeah, that's not for you, Mike. It's like, oh, really? It's like, yeah, you don't have what it takes. I go, wow. That's very kind of it. Well, no, but the truth is like, they're right, because as the two of you well know, I do not contain any pastoral nature in my system. And therefore, as a deacon, I really would not be equipped properly to be a deacon. I was extremely, and because, I don't know why I was considering it. Just I was in Mass one day and I was looking at what the deacon was doing, and I was like, I kind of felt called to serve and stuff like that. And it turns out I was called to serve in another way. This is before I became a communications director. And but no, the priests were really kind to me and said, don't do that.
It makes me think. Some people have this idea, and you'll have people who do approach young men and say, I think you'd be a good priest, and that's a great thing. And I think actually studies have shown, every year they do a big research study on the class being ordained priests, and then they publish those trends, and so we have it. And actually, an invitation from someone is one of the number one things, especially an invitation from their parish priest to consider the priesthood is one of the number one things that first sparks a guy. I do think the call's probably there already, but sparks a guy, right? Mm-hmm. And but some people then get so disappointed if they invite someone and he doesn't follow through with that discernment process. And it just reminds me, a classmate of mine from the seminary, he had been an entrepreneur in a major U.S. city, discerned that he was thinking about the priesthood, entered the seminary, did a couple years, realized it's not for him, and then left the seminary. He went back to that big U.S. city and went back to the same noon daily mass that he used to attend while he was discerning. He was a younger, he's a little older now after entering the seminary and stuff, but a younger single guy at daily mass. And he said an old lady came up to him and said, it was his first time back, like in years at this mass. Yeah. And she said, have you ever thought about becoming a priest? And he's like, ma'am, if you only knew. He didn't say it. He was very polite and everything. But, I think in a situation like that, here you have kind of someone who's like ready to pounce. And any young guy who's at church, he's going to say it too. And that's a temptation to say we need priests and we have a shortage of priests. We do need priests. And so they're like, let's just bring everyone in. But I think it's that discernment, that walking with God that the church does and that each man has to do in respecting the freedom of each person, where this really happens. And I would say if any listener has ever invited someone to consider the priesthood, like keep doing that, but please just pray for them and don't think you know what God wants for them, and be able to rejoice when that person discerns the path that God is calling them to.
And I'm glad to hear you mention the study that you said most men, when they're asked by their parish priest, right? Because I'm thinking, I personally did not grow up in a Catholic school, so I wouldn't know to have priests and religious sisters come in and talk about vocations. So that's one of the many, many blessings of being in a Catholic school. And at the same time, if you don't go to a Catholic school, but you're involved in your parish or in religious education, where that they could hear that that calling or be invited personally by hearing something.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. The two big just things that correspond, and I don't want to say cause because God is the cause of a vocation, right? But that correspond to a man responding to a vocation to the priesthood are that invitation, that personal invitation, especially by his parish priest, and being an altar server. There are other trends of did he go to youth group or not? Did he go to a Catholic school or not? Did he go to a Steubenville conference or a NCYC or some of those other events? Yeah. Even praying the Rosary, Eucharistic Adoration, they're pretty big up there. But the two number ones that come out year after year is that invitation by the priest and being an altar server. I suspect those two things are related because the altar servers vests in the sacristy. They see the priest. So the priest might, as Mike, you were saying, do I sometimes recognize a guy? And I think, it just gives the priest a chance to invite a guy as an altar server, right? They're actually finding now they're I think starting to study women entering convents, and they're finding that if a lot of them were altar servers too at their parishes.
Oh
wow!
Wow. So I yeah.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. But I think it's just that being an altar server gives someone that personal relationship, and in a way you can almost imagine yourself doing it. You're involved in the mass. You're wearing the alb or the cassock and surplice, whatever your parish wears. You're carrying the cross and candles. That I think comes into it too.
Yeah.
I was never an altar server.
I was actually going to ask you that.
I faked it once because I wanted to be.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I wanted to be in the May parade, so I lied in 7th or 8th grade and said I was an altar server. And the altar servers were like, "You're not an altar server," and I was like, "Shut up." And that was the one and only time I got to put on an alb. That was I'm pretty sure it was 7th or 8th grade. I can't remember which one. Probably 8th grade. I was more of a rebel then.
You were such a rebel. I can't wait to wear this alb.
Exactly. Well, because I got to leave class early that one time, and it was in the procession, the May procession.
Aww.
Yeah. See, and then and apparently by lying, it was found out later on that I have no skills as a man of the cloth. But that's okay.
It's a man of the cloth.
That's all right. Hey, listen, I think it's all worked out for the best. To be completely honest with you.
Probably.
I never had that desire. I never even thought about it. I never even thought about becoming a priest. But I don't recall.
I thought about becoming a nun.
Really?
Oh, wow.
You?
Yeah.
I mean, really? I mean, I don't know how to make that sound
In high
less
school.
insulting.
Yeah.
I didn't really grow up. We've talked on this. Actually, I never grew up. Right? No, I never grew up with faith a
Accurate.
lot. But I was very close to my grandfather, and when he died, I was very young. So I always read the Bible because he actually wanted to be a Lutheran pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I felt like I was praying and reading the Bible, I felt closer to him too.
Yeah.
And I would say for a while, when I was like junior high. I'm sorry, not junior high. Like my junior year of high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I considered it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting about that is just because a guy's like, and we're talking about priests here, but sisters too, right? Just because you're attracted to that vocation doesn't mean that you're called to it.
Yeah.
Because it's something good, and we should be attracted to something good. Just like if I had a guy come to me, and let's say he was a high school guy, a college guy, he's saying, I want to be a priest, and I one of the questions I'll ask is like, what do you think about marriage? And if he's like, I've never thought about marriage, I don't want to get married, it's like, you also might not be called to be a priest.
Yeah.
Because marriage is something good, right? So I want to hear a seminarian say, I'm attracted to marriage. I'm attracted to that possibility is something good that I recognize as good. And then as you discern and you listen to God more, you can say, all right, but it might not be my call, and I think that's good, but I think the priesthood gives me more joy. A sister might say, I see marriage good, but I think the religious life gives me more joy. A married person might say, we talked about the seminarians who left. I admire the priest. Mm-hmm. I'm attracted to the priesthood. I'm attracted to religious life. But in the end, I know that that's not my vocation. Mike might say I'm attracted to the diaconate. But in the end, I know it's not my vocation. I
mean, I would look great in a dalmatic. I'm just saying. I know I only worn an alb once, but I would look amazing in a dalmatic.
Yours would be like the wrinkled one.
Well, absolutely. Mine would definitely be the well-worn one. There's no doubt about that. But there'd be no frill or lace anywhere. I can tell you that right now.
No?
It'd be straight, whatever it's supposed to be.
Oh, okay.
But But I gave it some real thought. Like I looked into dalmatics and stuff like that. But it turns out that was what I was. It was the service part, but none of the other elements of the clergy had any impact on my interest.
This is one of those moments I wish we did have it videoed because the look on your face is, that wasn't going to happen.
No, 0%.
The look on our faces, generally like.
Yeah, that was never going to happen.
You didn't need to tell us, Mike. We know. Although and I realize this doesn't really kind of tangential. I mean, there are a number. You had brought up orders and stuff like that. There are some orders that have like lay avenues for if they have a particular calling to an order, like Franciscans, and stuff like that. I actually did look into this. We talked about the Jesuits a couple times. I actually did look at there was some version of that for the Jesuits. No, not interested. Completely, I could not find a single lay thing related to the Jesuits, and I'm like, you know what? Good, you guys are special. Do your own thing. But I texted.
I think the Augustinians have it though.
They do.
Might.
I just found that out. Father Burton Ozzy's parents are part of that.
Wow.
Yeah. They were interviewed in our article yesterday, and I only thought seculars were Franciscans, so I didn't know that.
I did contact the Jesuits once and asked if there was a way to become a deacon as a Jesuit, and they were like, "No." I was like, okay. Thanks, guys.
You really did do some
I really did.
investigative work
I
here.
really considered it, and no. So I'm out. I'm out. I can just do my own thing. I'm a vocation to myself. No big deal. Whatever. I'm not bitter. It's okay. Nobody wants me. At any rate, but I mean, so this, I'm very happy you came on this podcast. Thank you for coming on multiple times in multiple weeks.
Thanks.
We'll set you an office up over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have a permanent. You can have the vault anytime you want it. But these are always two very exciting weeks for me because I love the ordinations. I'm curious, and I should know this, but I don't. Do we have any ordinations coming up in the near future past these two?
Yep. So next year we're anticipated to have a priesthood ordination, but not a transitional diaconate ordination. And then we'll see where they go from there. Part of adding that extra year at the beginning is adding a little bit of extra time at the end. Okay. So it might throw things off with that. Mike, you mentioned at the beginning we do have a good bench of seminarians. I do believe, though, that God is calling a lot of men who aren't hearing his voice. And the reason I'm on here, we didn't even say this at the beginning, but this Sunday, Good Shepherd Sunday, is the World Day of Prayer for Vocations. And so just an invitation to the listeners to pray for vocations. Pray the prayer for vocations, that holy card that's put out. Make holy hours, say some rosaries. I know my own responsibilities, Bishop Williams has shared with me, is going to be focused a little more on vocations. And so maybe even in parishes to start vocations prayer groups, things like that. The prayer is the powerhouse of where this comes from. Jesus says, ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for their harvest. So we need to pray for more. We need to ask to get, more young men to hear the call that God's already given them.
Excellent.
Amen.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again and again and again. To our listeners, thank you very much for checking us out. And, certainly as I hope you'll take what you heard to heart today and consider what you can do to assist in the vocation process. And we'll be back again next week. See you, everybody.